In the Middle Ages, a woman wasn't born free. She was born under orders. Imagine opening your eyes for the first time in an isolated village, surrounded by the ruins of an empire that no longer exists. There's no state, no security, no peace. The only certainty in the world around you is chaos. This was the reality for women who lived between the 5th and 10th centuries, a dark period in European history known as the early Middle Ages. After the brutal fall of the Roman Empire, Europe plunged into a spiral of wars, barbarian invasions, and chronic instability. Villages were raided, castles crumbled, kings were replaced like leaves in the wind. But amid this landscape of destruction, one silent figure held the foundation of society together: the peasant woman. Can you imagine living in a world where your labor is invisible, yet essential? Where your physical and emotional strength keeps everyone alive, but your name is never even mentioned in historical records? Meanwhile, in the freezing towers of castles, the lives of noble women might have seemed more comfortable at first glance. But don't be fooled. They had no choice either. Their bodies, their marriages, and even their children were used as bargaining chips in political alliances. Often promised at a young age, noble girls were married off to men they had never even seen, all to consolidate territories, seal war pacts, or preserve pure bloodlines. It wasn't about love, affection, or compatibility. It was strategy, property, blood. Would you accept living your entire life next to a stranger in the name of land that isn't even yours? The truth is, they had no choice and no right to refuse. And if there was one force that shaped, controlled, and justified all this female submission, it was the church. During this period, the church came to occupy the space left by the empire, dominating minds, organizing laws, dictating what was right and wrong, especially for women. The female figure became increasingly associated with original sin: Eve's guilt, temptation, flesh, desire. It all fell on them. The Christian doctrine of the time taught that women were weak by nature, dangerous by essence, and inferior by design. And if in the early Middle Ages women were already seen as fragile and sinful, by the 10th century this view had evolved into something even crueler: a legal prison. Marriage, which had already been a political tool among nobles, now became a legal instrument of ownership. The moment a woman said yes at the altar, what she was really giving away was everything: her body, her property, her voice, and her autonomy. From that moment on, she was legally considered dependent on her husband. She couldn't sign contracts, couldn't manage land, couldn't defend herself in court, and often, she couldn't even leave the house without permission. Male authority was absolute, as if it were an extension of divine will. To the church, a woman was defined by a single virtue: chastity. To be chaste was to be worthy, respected, and accepted by God. But what seemed like a spiritual choice was, in practice, a cruel imposition. Many girls, sometimes teenagers or even children, when not forced into arranged marriages, were given by their families to convents. Can you imagine being locked away forever in a place you didn't choose? Having to renounce the world, your dreams, love, not out of faith but out of obligation. While silence was enforced through faith, alliances, and laws among the elites, in the villages and fields the burden was physical. A daily routine that rarely appears in history books, but that quite literally sustained the entire medieval economy. Imagine a woman waking before dawn in the middle of the European winter. No running water, no oven, no rest. She plants, harvests, feeds the animals, prepares meals, sews clothes, cleans, raises children, and still helps build fences and collect firewood. All of this without ever being called a worker. The name they gave it was natural duty. The medieval woman was the invisible engine of a society that never acknowledged her importance. And yet, her story was never recorded. In the books, only the names of kings. In the chronicles, only the deeds of saints and warriors. And throughout the Middle Ages, especially between the 12th and 13th centuries, knowledge became a male privilege and ignorance, a destiny imposed on women. But this was no accident. It was a systemic project that knew exactly what it was doing by distancing women from reading and writing. The vast majority of women were kept in the deepest intellectual darkness. In villages, the alphabet was a mystery. In castles, books were locked away. In churches, Latin was whispered among men. Very few managed to break through this barrier. Only the daughters of very wealthy nobles or young girls placed in convents had access to manuscripts and the arts. But now, you might be wondering, so were there no powerful women at all? The answer is yes. But they were extremely rare exceptions. And when they did emerge, they shone like lightning bolts in the darkness. One such bolt had a name: Christine de Pizan. Born in the 14th century, in a Europe where women were treated as inferior by nature, Christine dared to write. And not just to write, she dared to challenge. In her works, she asked, "Why do men write so many lies about women? Why are we blamed for everything? Even when we have no voice to defend ourselves, what if we were the ones to tell our own story?" Christine wasn't just a writer. She was a pioneer, one of the first women in Western history to make a living from her own writing. Can you imagine how many brilliant ideas, how many inventions, how many philosophies were suffocated before they were even thought of, simply because women were forbidden from learning? When knowledge was denied to them, women were left with what society called their natural destiny: motherhood. But being a mother in the Middle Ages was far from a symbol of fulfillment. It was, in fact, a major risk to their health. Childbirth was a crossing between life and death. Without hygiene, without anesthesia, without any specialized medical care, every pregnancy carried fear and danger. Women gave birth in unsanitary conditions, often in dirt floor homes, surrounded only by other women from the community. Support came from midwives, guardians of knowledge passed down through generations, based on hands-on experience and oral traditions. But even this knowledge, so valuable, was viewed with suspicion by the male-dominated official medical field. And as we've already discussed here, violence was tolerated as discipline. A woman was considered her husband's property, and society saw no issue with him using force to correct her behavior. When a woman showed independence, folk wisdom, or simply didn't conform to expectations, society didn't forgive. In the 15th century, fear and superstition became cruel weapons. Women were persecuted and accused of witchcraft. Healers, midwives, widows living alone, any one of them could be denounced. Simply having knowledge of medicinal herbs was enough to raise suspicion and lead to torture and death by fire. And while some were burned alive, others suffered in more silent ways, imprisoned not by fire, but by fashion itself. Among noble women, the female body was also controlled through clothing. Heavy gowns, flammable skirts, corsets that squeezed the torso until breathing became difficult. Aesthetic ideals, sold as symbols of status and elegance, were in practice just another form of discipline. The woman's body was molded to the standards men expected. There was no room for freedom of movement, much less for authenticity. These centuries of submission, silence, and control left deep scars that still resonate today. It's impossible not to feel the weight of that legacy. Every right earned by modern women is a cry that echoes against centuries of silence. The right to vote, to education, to make choices, to own their bodies. None of that existed back then. So now I ask you, which of these stories shocked you the most? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this video opened your eyes to what life was like for women in the Middle Ages, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you stories that almost no one tells, but everyone needs to hear. If you thought this story was shocking, just wait until you hear about the child Queen of England, who married at age 6 to a 29-year-old king. Just click right here on the screen.